Today we begin with a new theme, and that is on environmental ethics. This paper is being introduced in the fourth year, semester 7 of NEP UGCF as a part of the GE or General Elective paper for the students of philosophy. In this paper, Environmental Ethics, the attempt is to see how applied ethics has been a true call for that branch of philosophy which examines how humans and nature can have a common synchronity. It is also an attempt to understand how humans ought to relate to the natural world. And when we talk about ought to, please understand that we are talking about the ethical domain over the what is, which is the factual domain. With this, we begin our new theme today, which is on environmental ethics. And the first question would be, what is environmental ethics? This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Environmental ethics, as we understand, is a branch of philosophy that basically examines, synthesizes, sees, connects, disconnects, reconnects how humans ought to relate to the natural world. It asks the fundamental moral question: what is the value of nature? Who or what deserves moral consideration? What duties do we have towards the environment, and why? So we see that environmental ethics, in a way, challenges anthropocentric worldviews and expects moral imaginations beyond human interests. Now, what is this anthropocentric module? Anthropocentric module is the human-centered ethics. The core idea is nature matures only because it affects human well-being. The philosophical grounds of anthropocentrism is rooted in classical Western ethics like Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, and the early utilitarianism. The moral standing belongs to rational agents, that is, humans. The environment is an instrumental good. Now, the implication of these anthropocentric or the human-centered ethics is that one needs to protect, for example, forests, because humans need oxygen, resources, ecological stability, not because the forest has its own inherent worth. The critique of it is that such a centricism or such an approach, which is the anthropocentric, fails to capture why species or ecosystems matter in themselves. Now, this brings us to yet the other centricism, which is the sentient-centered or zoocentric ethics. The core idea is that all sentient beings capable of feeling pain or pleasure deserve moral consideration. The philosophical grounds of this is the utilitarian Peter Singer's equal consideration of interests. Suffering is morally relevant irrespective of species. Now, the implication of zoocentric is that animal agriculture, lab testing, and habitat destruction are wrong because they cause avoidable suffering to non-human animals. Of course, the critique is that there still excludes non-sentient entities like plants, species, rivers, ecosystems. The third approach has been the biocentric ethics. The core idea is all living beings possesses inherent value, not just those who feel or think. The philosophical grounding of this is Albert Schweitzer's reverence for life, Paul Taylor's belief in intrinsic worth of all life. The core idea is that of biocentric ethics is all living beings possesses inherent value, not just those who feel or think. The philosophical grounds of Albert Schweitzer's of reverence for life further connects this theme in a more expanded manner. Now, if we talk about the ecocentric or holistic ethics, we see that this is yet another centricism which was developed, and the idea was moral value lies in ecosystem, species and the integrity of the whole ecological community, not merely individuals. And the philosophical grounds, of course, Leopold's land ethic. Aldo Leopold's land ethic is taken as one of the landmarks works on this area. As he had rightly said, and I'm quoting Arnaez here, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability and beauty of the biotic community, deep ecology, where humans are considered a part of nature, not above it. So the implication is this of the ecocentrism or holistic ethics is that it may be ethical to limit or remove an invasive species to preserve ecological balance. The criticism is that holism might justify harming individuals for the greater ecological good. Now, since we had mentioned about NACE, we must talk about deep ecology too as one of the approaches. Now, deep ecology is a radical thinking of human identity. Humans must self-realize as part of the earth. The philosophical grounds of this is it rejects human dominance, it promotes biocentric equality, all the life has an equal right to flourish, encourages lifestyles based on simplicity, non-interference and harmony. The implication of deep ecology is environmental crisis is a spiritual as well as political problem. And the critique is that it is seen as too mystical or impractical by some scholars. Then comes the approach of ecofeminism. What is ecofeminism? Ecofeminism, the core idea is that oppression of nature is linked to oppression of women and other marginalized groups. The philosophical grounds such as the patriarchal values, which is to do with control, domination, exploitation, shape both gender relations and ecological exploitations. So ecofeminism emphasizes on care, relational ethics and interconnectedness. So the implication is that with ecofeminism, environmental solutions must involve social justice and dismantling hierarchies. Of course, the critique is there, which is accused, sometimes unfairly though, of essentializing women as closer to nature. Then comes the post-humanism or the new materialistic approaches. The core idea is it rejects rigid boundaries between human and non-human. Matter itself has agency. The world is a network of interacting forces. The philosophical grounds we see are in Bruno Latour, Jane Bennett, for whom the vibrant matter mattered. And their main theme is that humans under post-human or the new materialistic approaches are not the center, but one node in a web of vital agencies. So the implication of the new materialistic approach is that the ethical responsibility emerges from entanglement with ecological systems. So of course, there is a criticism for these as well, where they say it is too abstract and hard to translate into policy. Further, under number 8, we have the indigenous and the relational environmental ethics, where the core idea is nature is kin, sacred and relational, not a resource to be owned. The philosophical grounds are many indigenous cosmologies like the Native American, the Maori, the Adivasi, the Aboriginal. Ethics based on reciprocity, stewardship, and spiritual continuity. So, the implication of indigenous and relational environmental ethics is that be it the forests, the rivers, mountains, they possesses personhood. And this feature is philosophically expanded in Wanganui River in New Zealand. Of course, there is a criticism against these ism too, and it is that it is often marginalized in a formal philosophical discourse despite rich insights. Now, we get straight to the main theme of our discussion today. With this background in mind, the various isms that we have just mentioned, 8 of them, starting from anthropocentrism to zoocentrism or the sentient-centered ethics to biocentric, fourthly, the ecocentric or holistic ethics, fifth, the deep ecology, sixth, ecofeminism, seventh, post-humanism or the new materialistic approaches, and last but not the least, the indigenous and relational environmental ethics. We are good to start with the very prime question: what is environmental ethics? Environmental ethics is the branch of philosophy that studies how human beings should think about and treat the natural world. It asks, does nature have value of its own? Do animals, plants, rivers, forests, or ecosystems deserve moral respect? What duties do we have towards the environment? In short, environmental ethics tries to justify why we must protect nature and how moral responsibility extends beyond humans. So, the very mention of the approaches which I had just done about in the beginning was to make the viewers aware that when we are discussing the first part of our discussion today, which is what is environmental ethics, the various approaches are interlinked. And if we are to talk about the environmental ethics, we will have to also talk about the approaches that justify environmental ethics. Now that we have mentioned those 8 isms or the 8 centricisms, we will be picking each one of them in greater detail and will be discussing more. The first was, if you remember, the anthropocentric approach or the human-centered. Nature is important because they say it benefits humans. Protecting the environment is justified as it ensures human survival, health, economy, and well-being. Now, some of the example that we can see is, safe forests because they give oxygen and resources to people. Whereas the zoocentric or the sentient-centered approach had noted that moral concern extends to all animals that feel pain, pleasure, and all other emotions. Environmental ethics is justified because harming animals is morally wrong. And as such, the example that they float would be something like opposing factory farming or habitat destruction that causes animal suffering. Further, there is also the biocentric approach or the life-centered, where the key theme is that all living beings, even plants and microbes, have inherent value. Nature deserves respect because every organism strives to live. Example is, they say that avoid needless destruction of plants or species because life itself has worth. There is also ecocentric view or the holistic approach view, where they say that value lies not just in individual beings but in ecosystems as a whole. Ethics is justified because the stability and beauty of the entire ecological community must be protected. Some of the examples that they vouch for is one should be protecting the rivers, the wetlands or forests, even if no single creature is directly harmed. We also have the deep ecology approach, where they say that humans are not superior. We are part of nature. Ethics is justified by a deeper spiritual, ecological, philosophical understanding that all beings have equal right to flourish. It encourages simplicity, harmony, and non-dominance. Now comes the ecofeminist approach. The ecofeminist approach is seen as the domination of nature is linked to the domination of women and marginalized groups. Environmental ethics is justified because overcoming all forms of domination is necessary for ecological balance and justice. We also have had the indigenous or the relational approaches, where they note that it is based largely on traditional worldviews where nature is kin, sacred, and alive. Environmental care is justified through relationships of respect, reciprocity, stewardship towards land, water, and species. And the very background of the indigenous or the relational approaches is nature is relatively in sync with human beings. Human beings are there because there is nature and not the other way around. So they would rather be worshipping nature as sacred. And this is where in most of the places, especially even in Northeast India, we find the existence of sacred groves. So whenever, wherever, however we see such sacred groves, we might or we must be reminded about the indigenous or the relational approach module. So now that the backdrop is clear, we have understood this much, which is environmental ethics is a branch of philosophy. It examines the moral relationship between human beings and the natural world. The questions or the ethical questions that environmental ethics seeks to ask is, do only humans have moral value, or do animals, plants, species and ecosystems also possesses inherent worth? Now, asking questions or raising critical views are significant in philosophy, for please remember, philosophy, unlike the other social sciences, is interested in critically investigating a subject. Philosophers are not much interested in hence proved or thus proved. I mean, that's the domain of a scientist. What philosophy is interested is to show the red flag, is to highlight the gaps, research, problematic or otherwise. So for a philosopher to expect that they would work the way a scientist does would be a little too far-fetched. For philosophers are best suited to show the red flags, to critically show where the gaps are, and to keep questioning even when nobody does. So environmental ethics also questions, and the questions I have just about mentioned. Thus, the attempts of environmental ethics is to expand the circle of moral concern beyond humans and justify why nature deserves ethical protection. Now, this field is important because modern environmental crises like climate change, species extinction, pollution, deforestation raise deep moral questions about responsibility, justice, and intergenerational duty. Right. Now, the first question that should be striking all of us is, how are these various approaches that we have about mentioned interconnected? Let us quickly revisit. We had said that the anthropocentric approach, which was the human-centered view, holds that the environment should be protected because it directly affects human welfare. Nature, they would say, has instrumental value. It provides resources, it also provides stability, and what more, a healthy life. Thus, ethical responsibility arises from safeguarding the conditions necessary for human survival and flourishing. Secondly, with the sentient-centered approach, if you remember, they had spoken how this approach extends moral concern to all beings capable of feeling pain. Peter Singer argues that causing unnecessary sufferings to animal is morally wrong. The ethical responsibility arises because animals are sentient subjects whose interests deserve equal consideration. The biocentric approach, or the life-centered, holds that all living organisms have intrinsic value, not just humans and animals. Again, we had talked about how the plants, the microbes, the insects, and humans all have a natural purpose and strive to live. So it isn't the case that just because we happen to be born as humans, we are in any way superior. Not at all. The anthropocentric model, remember, has been self-defeated. Similarly, in biocentric, what do? They say that whether we are humans or plants or animals or microbes or insects, all of us have a natural purpose and a strive to live. Ethical responsibility is justified because life itself is morally significant. Then the ecocentric or holistic approach, the ecocentrism values ecosystems, species, and the integrity of the ecological community as a whole. Leopold's land ethic, which we had been mentioning, had rightly stated that a thing is right when it preserves the integrity, the stability, and the beauty of the biotic community, and responsibility is justified by the need to maintain ecological balance, biodiversity, and long-term planetary health, even if it means prioritizing ecosystems over individual beings. Now, here deep ecology again proposes a radical shift in human consciousness. Humans are not masters of nature, but part of an interconnected web of life. It advocates the biocentric equality, the idea that all beings have an equal right to flourish. Ethical responsibility arises from spiritual and ecological identification with the earth. However, the eco-feminist approach argues that the domination of nature is linked to the domination of women and marginalized groups, and as such, they would rather stop any such module that goes for industrialization. For they would say that just as creating or manufacturing industries would harm nature, similarly, which is capitalism harming nature, similarly industries is linked with man or the patriarchy who harms women. So in a way, nature is considered to be more closer to women, and capitalism vis-a-vis industries are considered to be more closer to man, and that is how their approach is, and as such it is called as an eco-feminist approach. Now, to heal this ecological destruction, systems of exploitation must be dismantled. Ethical responsibility is justified because environmental protection and social justice are inseparable. So please understand that in this ecofeminist approach, they are not just interested in the dismantling of a particular feature, but they say that this entire exploitation has to be dismantled. Only then can we nurture and heal ecological destruction. Otherwise, if we become just a bystander of nature being affected with insane multiple industries being cropping up from right, left and center, not being bothered, ultimately it will also get onto us. For it is a reflection of the society where if there has been any such cases where the marginalized or the women are being in a disadvantaged position and we keep mute, there's something not right. So for the healing or to heal ecological destruction, systems of exploitation from whichever corner must, ought, should be dismantled. Then we had also talked about the indigenous and the relational approaches, where the indigenous worldviews treat nature as, relative or relational. And when I say relational, they would rather worship nature over worshipping any deity. And many people consider it as the pagan culture, but it is more than that, for they feel and believe staunchly that humans owe respect and care to land, water, animals, and ancestral ecosystems, and they should not really be only using or misusing or abusing nature for their goal. They ought to also give the same amount of respect, the same amount of love, the same amount of care to the ecosystems too. And as such, their ethical responsibility arises from living harmoniously within a sacred ecological order. So we see that the environmental ethics broadens moral consideration beyond humanity and offers multiple philosophical grounds for protecting nature, whether for human benefit, the welfare of animals, the value of life, the integrity of ecosystems, spiritual unity, justice, or traditional ecological wisdom. Together, these approaches justify a strong ethical responsibility towards the environment in an age of global and ecological crisis. Thank you so much. We will be connecting more with our themes on environmental ethics. Thank you.